a new type of ship coming to Stellaris. The base ships, to be specific. I'm not talking Titans. I'm not talking Juggernauts. No, something a little bit smaller is coming to fleet combat within the game. And there are some very, very good reasons for this. Because, let's put it this way, the developers are trying to get rid of mono fleets and trying to make mixed fleet combat a lot more interesting. Trying to get rid of the Alpha Strike Artillery battleship meta that is currently reigning supreme within the game is one of the big priorities when it comes to rebalancing the overall combat within the game. Now, what is not being touched by this is also a really good question to ask yourself. There is not going to be any changes to ground combat. There is not going to be any changes to invasions or the way wars are handled in general. That is completely out of the scope of this change. It is purely fleet combat and meta based on this one. So what are we going to see here? Well, the overall goal is to make cruisers and destroyers a lot more interesting within the overall scope of the game. Point defense is completely useless right now, so why would you build it? But they want to bring it back because it's in the game. Some of the meta weapons, i.e. the rare stuff that you can find in the game, could be touched by this as well. But overall, destroyers are just not that valuable because for the same price, you can build corvettes that are better. So what is going to change in this regard? Well, first of all, there is going to be an overall increase in the base hull points of ships. There's also going to be special modules added to the game, or at least that is the current suggestion. Final numbers aren't final, all that stuff, that will harden armor as well as shields. So this will be most likely be part of the modules that you can attach to your ship. There's also the goal of making combat computers more effective, so that they actually respect their desired range. So for instance, if you have a combat computer that is set to say 60, even though you have a weapon on the ship that has a goal of being usable at 30, it will not get within that 30 range unless something else does, so it engages at that area. Which means that there is far more layering going on within the actual scope of combat, and battleships that have long-range kinetic weapons will sit all the way back and then screeners right in front of them, etc. So what kind of classes can we expect here in terms of types of ships that are within the meta of the game? Well, artillery ship rolls, which are ships that are based for super long range, brawlers, which are extremely short range weapons with high DPS, essentially the autocannons, carriers at extreme range, sending out strike craft, gunships, a lot of medium-sized weapons, so expect things like cruisers, screening, point defense, intercept smaller craft, so destroyers with point defense, flak weapons, that sort of thing, and finally, the one that you're here for, the Torpedo Frigate, currently also kind of referred to as the Bomber. Now, the Bomber is all about extremely short range, deadly to extremely large ships. So they're not as effective versus other corvettes or destroyers. The larger the ship, the more damage it will do with its torpedoes. And that essentially has modifiers attached to it. So if you are shooting a torpedo with your extremely slow but rather chunky Bomber Corvette, you will do an extreme amount of damage to battleship. A 5-time modifier with your torpedoes. But of course, they will need to get there, which means that they are slow. They're fairly heavily armored, but they need to get in range. And that's why torpedoes will now be an extremely short-range weapon. Now, missiles are now a S-slot artillery weapon. They'll have extreme range, but torpedoes won't in this particular case. So swarmer missiles are M-slots, so you can have a lot of medium weapons, say, on your cruisers. Autocannons are the brawler weapons, so you put them on destroyers and basically run around to the enemy and trying to get as much damage on the enemy as possible. Armor hardening and shields, we already talked a bit about that, so you'll be able to counter armor and shield penetration. This is also where it's really important to get up to that 60 level espionage, so you can know exactly what the enemy is up to. Strike craft will no longer intercept missiles or torpedoes, but they will intercept other strike craft, which I think is a little bit interesting considering, you know, the ancient adjective of the Spitfires intercepting V1 missiles over London, you know, that sort of thing. It's a bit of a shame, but I'm sure there's a good balance reasoning for this. And finally, point defense and flak being more strongly focused on their preferred targets, which in this particular case would be missiles, would be strike craft, and also those bombers that we were talking about. So, Torpedoes, extremely short range that deal multiplicative damage against a size target. So, if you are a battleship, you will receive 5 times the power of a torpedo, but they are going to be extremely slow. So be aware of that. They'll need to get in range, and then if they are taken out, well, then you lose all that firepower. But essentially sending a whole flock of naked corvettes with a giant missile strapped to them, then, well, you get the general idea. Energy torpedoes are now a torpedo slot, or at least a missile slot, and they'll have a minimum range as well. So they need to be at least a certain amount of distance away. They also do a lot of damage based on their target size, but their DPS is adjusted a little bit, so you'll need to be careful about that. Also, energy torpedoes are still instant hit weapons, so as soon as they get loose, then you may be in trouble. They won't do as much damage as standard torpedoes do, but still. But the Torpedo Corvettes, as they are going to be their own ship class, will have higher hull, lower speed and evasion than regular corvettes. They will have a special torpedo combat computer that will increase their explosive damage as well as a quote-unquote charge behavior. So they will charge the enemy as fast as they can. Now, in this particular scenario, what I would expect is that you would bring in the fleet, try to alpha down as much as you can, then bring in the secondary fleet with torpedo corvettes and try to engage the enemy whilst they're already engaged with the secondary fleet. So you can mess around with combat computers in this particular scenario. Also, finding an enemy fleet that is sitting on the edge of a system and then jumping right on top of them with these torpedo corvettes is going to be super useful, because if you enclose that distance super quickly, then you will be in a really good place. Also, the Unbidden have received the same sort of bonus. So those Unbidden with their standard matter disintegrators, yeah, they will be doing 5 times as much damage versus large hulls. So the real question is this going to work? And this is something that the developers are currently trying to figure out. Currently, all these changes do not exist on any branch within the Paradox Development Studio delivery systems internally in terms when it comes to their balancing, etc. However, mixed fleets feel a lot more rewarding because every single ship class has a valuable service it's provided. So corvettes, high evasion, they are fast, they're good at hunting and down other torpedo corvettes and artillery battleships as well as cruisers. That's good. Torpedo corvettes, they will threaten large ships at any moment in time, and if you do not watch out for them, you will lose your battleships. They are extremely strong, but they can get flattened down by destroyers. So having a lot of these means that your enemy will need to counter with destroyers. You cannot leave them on their own. They're basically like the armies, as in if you leave them by themselves, they will most likely die, as they just have a giant torpedo strapped to them. And they're also not that accurate from what I understand. Destroyers, great point defense, screening. Torpedoes, they will die versus them. Cruisers, very versatile. There's talked a little bit about making cruisers a little bit more rewarding, making them the ultimate logistics ship to a certain degree. We talked a little bit about auras and essentially how the old battleship auras could be applied to cruisers, because the only place that they happen right now is on Titans. And Titans are introduced way too late in the game to add a different feature on top of them. Sure, you have an aura. Okay, that's cool. But players learn about this way too late, and maybe getting a smaller aura that does not stack on cruisers in terms of like a more of a logistics style ship that can heal the rest of the fleet could be the way to go. Who knows? That's something that we talked about there. Battleships, they still have XL weapons. They'll still pew like mad. They're just not nearly as effective than they used to be. But yeah, a lot more ships will have great categories that they can fill, and it's looking very interesting to see. We haven't had a major fleet overhaul since 2.0 Apocalypse, and it's good to see. Even though back then, you know, they took the tachyons away from the L-size weapons and they moved them to XL, which is, you know, a little bit sad because destroyer, tachy destroyers, I missed them. Sometimes I roll back the game to 1.9 and just play with them a little bit. But yeah, what can one do? So, what to expect from this? Well, in the next few weeks, with the release of Toxoids will come the 3.5 Fornax update. All of this stuff is not for Fornax. This is for 3.6 Orion. So consider this an official announcement of Orion being in the pipeline. And it will come out in sometime later in the year. Overall, the patch cycle is about 4 per year. We're now at the end of we're now in patch number 3. So expect maybe November, December for this particular patch, even though I don't necessarily think December is going to be on the cards due to Christmas being a thing. But still, in the gaming industry, December is usually a bit of a wash. So, Orion, for testing purposes, considering this is such a big change, is going to have an open beta attached to it. So if you're out there and you're like, okay, these changes are cool, we're going to go and see the dev diaries on this. Absolutely. And I want to test all of this stuff. I want to try it out. Because QA on this particular one is going to be rather swamped, and there are so many variables to take into account. The developers have basically asked, break our game in every way, shape, or form that you can imagine, and we will try to fix it and balance things. The things with ships is that they are never balanced. It's going to take time, but sooner or later a new meta is going to pop up. That's pretty much guaranteed. But the thing is that it takes time to get there, and until we get there, we need to figure out what is actually going on. And that's why balancing testing needs to happen. So a open beta for 3.6 Orion is going to happen. Once it comes out, I will let you guys know. And of course, you can always go to the forums as well to figure out what is going on there. In addition to that, the Ascension Path experiments will also most likely be part of this open beta for 3.6. So make sure if you want to go and check those out, that you do so as well. There's still also currently some experimenting going on with fleet sizes, disengagement changes, what a ship costs, because in general there are too many fleets, too many def stacks in the late game that the developers want to avoid. This could be a performance thing, or whether or not you just don't want to have a million tiny fleets flying around for a variety of reasons, even though I'm personally a big fan of this. So yeah, we will see. Yeah. There you have it. If you are interested in finding out more about this or the Ascension perks that I already talked about, the Ascension perks are being covered in a separate video. Feel free to go and check that out. I released that the other day. There's a big box in front of you right now in order for you to link to it. So go and check it out. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming in for Ascension paths, and I hope that you're going to be excited as much as I am. That has been the main news for the changes that are coming up from PDXCon. Very soon we're going to be talking about Toxoids and what we can expect from that expansion with a proper overview and all the bells and whistles. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take good care of yourself. Go and check out that Ascension perk video, and we will see you on the other side.